The air in the hospital waiting room was thick with the scent of antiseptic and quiet despair. Liam sat on a worn vinyl chair, his large, calloused hands resting on his knees. He felt out of place in his dusty work clothes, a stark contrast to the sterile environment around him. For 3 years, this had been his routine. Work a 10-hour shift at the carpentry workshop, grab a cheap sandwich, and then drive to the Serenity Gardens hospice to sit with Eleanor, his mother-in-law. And, of course, to pay the bills. His wife, Clara, swept into the room, not with a gentle rustle, but with a sharp, impatient click of expensive heels on the linoleum floor. She didn't look at him. Her eyes, cold and sharp like chips of ice, scanned the drab room with undisguised contempt. She clutched a designer handbag to her chest like a shield, her perfectly tailored dress screaming of a world far removed from this place of sickness and slow goodbyes. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. Liam nodded, gesturing to the receipt on the small table beside him. "I just settled this month's account, Clara. The administrator said everything is fine." Clara glanced at the paper, a flicker of something ugly crossing her features. It was a look he had seen 1,000 times, a mixture of disdain and reluctant necessity. She hated that he was the one doing this. She hated that she needed him to. "Good," she said, turning her attention to her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "At least you're useful for something." The cruelty of the remark was so casual, so practiced, that Liam barely flinched anymore. It was just the air he breathed in her presence. He looked through the glass partition into Eleanor's room. The old woman was asleep, her face a pale, fragile mask against the white pillows. Wires and tubes connected her to a host of beeping machines that sang a monotonous song of survival. Just last week, during a rare moment of lucidity, Eleanor had gripped his hand with surprising strength. Her eyes, clouded with medication, but clear in their intent, had fixed on his. "Liam," she had rasped, her voice a dry whisper. "You are a good man, a better man than she deserves." She had pushed a thick, yellowed envelope into his palm. "For a rainy day," she had whispered, a faint smile touching her lips. "Don't let her see it. Ever. Promise me." He had promised. The envelope was in the inner pocket of his jacket right now, a strange, heavy secret pressed against his chest. Clara snapped her purse shut with a sound like a gunshot. "We need to talk." He turned to face her. He knew this tone. It was the prelude to a storm. "I can't do this anymore, Liam," she began, not even bothering to lower her voice. A nurse at a nearby station glanced over, her expression carefully neutral. "Do what?" he asked, though he already knew. He had felt it coming for months, a slow, inevitable tide pulling them apart. "This!" she exclaimed, gesturing vaguely at the waiting room, at his clothes, at the invisible, suffocating weight of their life. "This pathetic, dreary existence, working yourself to the bone for what? To pay for her, to live in that tiny, cramped house that smells of sawdust and failure." Each word was a precisely aimed dart, dipped in years of simmering resentment. "It's my job, Clara. It's how I take care of things, of your mother," he said, his voice low and steady. She let out a short, brutal laugh. "Take care of things? You are barely keeping your head above water. I want more. I deserve more." Her eyes glittered with a fierce, ambitious light. "I've met someone, Liam." There it was, the final blow delivered without anesthetic. "His name is Marcus," she continued, her voice gaining a triumphant, almost giddy edge. "Marcus Thorne. You might have heard of him. Thorne Development. He's building the new Elysian Towers downtown." Liam remained silent. He had seen the billboards, of course. gleaming monuments of steel and glass, promising a life of effortless luxury. "He respects me," Clara said, the words a direct condemnation of Liam. "He sees my potential. He doesn't want me to be dragged down by all of this." She pulled a wallet from her purse and extracted a few crisp $100 bills. She didn't hand them to him. She tossed them onto the table, where they landed next to the hospice receipt. The gesture was so profoundly contemptuous, so utterly demeaning, that the air was punched out of Liam's lungs. The nurse at the station looked away, a flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. "Here," Clara said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "A little something for your trouble, a final charity payment. Consider it severance. I'll have my lawyer send over the divorce papers. My things will be picked up tomorrow." She didn't wait for a response. She turned, her heels clicking a sharp, decisive rhythm of departure, and walked out of his life without a backward glance. Liam sat there, frozen. The $100 bills lay on the table like a judgment. He felt the eyes of the nurse on him, the pity of a stranger, which was somehow worse than Clara's hate. He slowly reached out, not for the money, but for the receipt. He folded it carefully and placed it in his wallet. Then he picked up the cash, walked over to the donation box for the hospice, and pushed the bills through the slot. He wouldn't touch her money. He wouldn't carry the stain of her insult. He walked back to his chair and sat down, his body feeling immensely heavy. The beeping of the machines from Eleanor's room seemed to grow louder, each pulse a tick of the clock on a life he no longer recognized. He reached into his jacket and felt the crisp edges of the envelope. "For a rainy day," Eleanor had said. Outside, the sky had opened up. A cold, hard rain began to fall, streaking the windows of the waiting room like tears. It was raining. It was definitely raining. The days that followed were a blur of hollow spaces and sharp edges. The house, once merely small, now felt cavernously empty. The scent of her expensive perfume, which had always clung to the curtains, faded, replaced only by the familiar smell of wood and varnish from his workshop. It was the scent of his own life, a life she had deemed a failure. Movers, clinical and efficient, came and stripped the house of her presence. They took the furniture she had picked out, the art she had hung on the walls, the countless clothes and shoes that had filled the closets. They left behind only the things he had built with his own hands, the sturdy oak dining table, the bookshelf in the living room, the bed frame in his room. His life had been reduced to its bare wooden bones. He worked. That was what he knew how to do. He poured his grief and humiliation into the grain of the wood, sanding and shaping and joining until his muscles ached and his mind was too numb to feel. He took on extra projects, working late into the night under the solitary glow of a workshop lamp. Every extra dollar went into the account he kept for Eleanor's care. It was a promise, and Liam was a man who kept his promises. Clara, meanwhile, was living a very different life. Her social media became a spectacle of her ascent. Photos of her and Marcus Thorne dripped with opulence. They were on a yacht, glasses of champagne catching the sunlight. They were at a charity gala, Clara draped in a glittering gown, Marcus's arm possessively around her waist. They were standing on a construction site, wearing hard hats, pointing at the skeleton of a skyscraper that would soon pierce the clouds. Her captions were filled with hashtags like #LivingMyBestLife, #PowerCouple, and #Upgraded. Each post felt like a personal, public taunt. She was broadcasting her victory to the world, ensuring he understood exactly what he had lost, what he had never been good enough to provide. Marcus Thorne was everything Liam was not. He was polished, ruthless, and celebrated for his ambition. His interviews in business journals portrayed him as a visionary, a man who could bend the city's skyline to his will. He spoke of disruption and legacy, words that felt alien and grandiose to Liam, who measured his legacy in the smooth finish of a tabletop or the perfect fit of a dovetail joint. Their crowning achievement was to be Elysian Towers, a project of breathtaking scale and arrogance. It was destined to be the most exclusive address in the city, a vertical village for the ultra-rich. But their grand vision had hit a snag, a detail that began to appear as a footnote in financial news reports. The project was stalled. A single, crucial parcel of land in the middle of their planned footprint remained stubbornly unacquired. The owner was anonymous, represented by a notoriously tight-lipped law firm, and had rejected every increasingly generous offer. Marcus, in a rare, candid comment to a reporter, had called the holdout owner a sentimental fool holding back progress. Clara, in one of her posts, had written, "Some people just want to stand in the way of the future. Sad, but we will prevail." Liam read these things with a distant, aching sense of detachment. Their world was so loud, so shiny, so utterly disconnected from his own. He paid their taunts no mind. He had work to do. He had bills to pay. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, he sat at the oak table he had built, the divorce papers from Clara's lawyer spread before him. They were as cold and impersonal as she was, a series of clauses and demands that sought to legally erase their decade together. He felt a profound weariness settle into his bones. He was tired of being the quiet, dependable man. He was tired of absorbing blows and carrying burdens without complaint. He was just tired. His hand went to his jacket hanging on the back of the chair. He pulled out Eleanor's envelope. He had carried it with him every day since Clara had left, a talisman he didn't understand. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the wax seal, which was stamped with a strange, unfamiliar crest. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation. There was only a heavy, ornate, old-fashioned skeleton key and a single piece of thick, cream-coloured cardstock. Engraved on the card was a name and an address, and Mr. Alistair Abernathy, Abernathy & Crow, 101 Lexington Tower, 50th floor. Liam stared at the card. Abernathy & Crow was the most prestigious and oldest law firm in the state. They represented old money, the kind of quiet dynastic wealth that didn't need flashy billboards. What could Eleanor possibly have to do with a firm like that? A flicker of something, not quite hope, but a stubborn spark of curiosity, ignited within him. He had nothing left to lose. His old life was a pile of ashes. The next morning he called his workshop and told his boss he needed to take a personal day, the first he had taken in years. He put on his only suit, the one he had worn to his wedding and to his father's funeral. It felt stiff and unfamiliar. He drove downtown, his modest pickup truck feeling like a dinghy in a sea of sleek, black, luxury sedans. Lexington Tower was a monolith of dark glass and polished granite that seemed to scrape the sky. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth. Marble floors gleamed, and the air was hushed and cool. He felt the eyes of the security guard on him, his simple suit and worn leather shoes marking him as an intruder. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his tone polite but firm. "I have an appointment with Mr. Alistair Abernathy," Liam said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. The guard checked his list, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Of course, sir, 50th floor." The elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching speed. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, it was into another world. The offices of Abernathy & Crow were a sanctuary of dark wood, worn leather, and the faint, pleasant scent of old books and floor wax. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, offering a godlike view of the city sprawling below. A severe-looking woman with silver hair greeted him. "Mr. Liam Sterling, Mr. Abernathy is expecting you." She led him down a long, quiet hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men, their eyes seeming to follow him with appraisal. She opened a heavy oak door and gestured for him to enter. Alistair Abernathy was a man who seemed as old and solid as the building itself. He was tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit that seemed to be from another era. He had a shock of white hair and eyes that were a startlingly pale blue, sharp and intelligent. He rose from behind a desk the size of a small boat. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice a dry, precise baritone. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. I have been waiting for you for a very long time." Liam sat in a leather chair that sighed as he sank into it. He placed the old key and the card on the polished surface of the desk. Abernathy smiled, a faint, knowing expression. "Ah, yes, the key. I trust your journey here was acceptable." "I'm not sure what this is all about," Liam said honestly. "My mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, she gave this to me." "Indeed," Abernathy said, leaning back in his chair. "Eleanor is a remarkable woman, and her late husband, Arthur Vance, was even more so. He was my client for over 40 years, and he was, to put it mildly, a man of unique principles." Liam listened, his confusion deepening. He had only known Arthur as a quiet, grumpy old man who worked as a high school history teacher and tinkered with clocks in his retirement. Arthur Vance, Abernathy continued, steepling his long fingers, despised the vulgarity of new money. He believed wealth was a responsibility, not a toy. While he taught history for a modest salary, he was, in secret, one of the most brilliant and successful investors of his generation. Abernathy paused, letting the statement hang in the air. He amassed a fortune of staggering proportions, but he lived modestly, and he raised his daughter, Clara, to believe they were of simple, middle-class means. It was a test, you see. He wanted to see if his daughter would inherit his character, or if she would be swayed by the cheap allure of status and greed. Liam felt a cold dread begin to creep up his spine. Before he passed away, Arthur established a trust, the Vance Legacy Trust. It is extensive. It contains the entirety of his fortune, and it was governed by a very specific set of instructions. Abernathy leaned forward, his pale blue eyes locking onto Liam's. The trust was to remain dormant, managed by this firm, until two conditions were met. First, that his wife, Eleanor, was cared for with dignity and love until the end of her days. Second, the assets were to be transferred not to his daughter by default, but to the individual who demonstrated the qualities Arthur valued most: loyalty, humility, and sacrifice. The lawyer gestured to a thick, leather-bound ledger on his desk. "For the past 10 years, Mr. Sterling, we have been watching. We saw you marry Clara. We saw you work tirelessly to provide for her. We saw you take on the crushing financial burden of Eleanor's long-term care after Clara dismissed it as an inconvenience. We have documented every single payment you have made to that hospice from your own modest bank account without fail for 38 consecutive months. We also documented Clara's complete and total abdication of that responsibility." Liam's heart was hammering against his ribs. The quiet, sunlit office seemed to tilt on its axis. "Your wife's recent actions," Abernathy said, his voice laced with a cold disapproval. "Her public abandonment of you for a man she perceives to be wealthier was, for the trustees, the final disqualifying act. Your continued, selfless care for Eleanor in the face of that humiliation was the final confirmation." He pushed the ledger across the desk. According to the immutable terms of the Vance Legacy Trust, as of last Tuesday, you, Liam Sterling, are the sole and undisputed beneficiary. Liam stared at him, uncomprehending. The beneficiary of what? Abernathy allowed himself another thin smile. Of everything, the investment portfolios, the charitable foundations, the offshore accounts, the controlling shares in a dozen corporations, and, of course, the real estate. The lawyer slid a map across the desk, a detailed schematic of the downtown core. He tapped a finger on one specific, shaded block. It is a vast portfolio, Abernathy said softly. But I believe this particular holding will be of immediate interest to you. It's a small, unassuming plot of land that has been in the Vance family for generations. Lately, it has become quite popular. Liam looked at the map. He recognized the streets, he recognized the shape of the property. It was the exact footprint of the stalled Elysian Towers project. He was the holdout. He was the sentimental fool holding back progress. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city far below. Liam stared at the map, his mind struggling to connect the disparate pieces of his life. The years of thankless work, the quiet humiliations, Clara's casual cruelty, Eleanor's cryptic gift, it was all rushing together, forming a picture so vast and unbelievable it made him dizzy. How much? Liam finally managed to ask, his voice a hoarse whisper. The trust. What is it worth? Mr. Abernathy did not consult a file or a computer screen. The number was clearly etched into his memory. The liquid assets, conservatively valued, are approximately $3.7 billion. The total value of the trust, including all holdings and real estate, is considerably more. $3.7 billion. The number was meaningless. It was an abstraction, a string of words that his brain refused to process. He had spent the last month worrying about a $400 bill for his truck's transmission. He looked from the map to Abernathy's impassive face, then back again. A wave of something hot and powerful washed over him, not joy, not yet. It was a feeling of profound seismic shock, the ground beneath his entire life crumbling away to reveal something solid and immense beneath. He thought of Clara tossing those $100 bills on the table, a final charity payment. He thought of her smug, triumphant posts celebrating her upgrade to a man of wealth and vision. Marcus Thorne, the visionary, was building his legacy on a foundation of debt and arrogance, desperately trying to acquire a piece of land from a sentimental fool. A fool who was now one of a handful of people on the planet who could buy and sell Marcus Thorne without a second thought. The irony was so staggering, so absolute, it was almost comical. A dry, humorless laugh escaped Liam's lips. Abernathy watched him, his expression unreadable. It is a great deal to absorb, I know. You said you've been watching, Liam said, his mind starting to work again, the fog of shock beginning to clear. You knew all of this. You knew how she treated me. You knew I was paying for everything. We are administrators, Mr. Sterling, not arbiters, Abernathy replied calmly. Our duty was to observe and to execute the terms of the trust as written by its founder. Arthur Vance did not want to reward potential. He wanted to reward proven character. That requires a trial. You, I'm afraid, have been living through a rather extended and unpleasant one. The pieces clicked into place with a cold, final finality. This wasn't a lottery win, it wasn't a stroke of luck, it was a verdict. It was the result of a long, cruel, secret test, and he had passed. Clara had failed. The weariness that had settled in his bones for years began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning, unfamiliar fire. It was the fire of agency, the power to act, the power to right a decade of wrongs. He leaned forward, his calloused hands flat on the polished mahogany desk. The man who had walked into this office an hour ago was gone. The humble carpenter, the patient victim, was being burned away. "Mr. Abernathy," Liam said, his voice low but carrying a new, hard weight. "You said Arthur Vance despised vulgarity and valued responsibility." "That is correct." "And you said this firm's duty is to execute the terms of the trust, to the letter." "Good," Liam said. "Because Marcus Thorne and my ex-wife are the embodiment of everything Arthur Vance despised. Their entire world is built on a lie of superiority. They built their happiness on my quiet suffering." He looked Abernathy directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something in the old lawyer's gaze. It was respect. "I want to see what their world looks like when the foundation is kicked out from under it," Liam stated. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Abernathy picked up a pen. "I have been hoping you would say that. My team has already conducted a full preliminary workup on Thorne Development as a matter of due diligence. His company is a house of cards, Mr. Sterling, a monument to leverage built on a series of high-risk bridge loans and investor capital." He gestured to a stack of files on the corner of his desk. "He is overextended, arrogant, and vulnerable. With the resources of the Vance Trust at our disposal, we can dismantle his empire with surgical precision." This was the moment, the decision point, the instant he chose to stop being the anvil and become the hammer. Liam picked up the pen Abernathy offered. It was heavy and cold in his hand. He looked at the signature line on the document that would formally transfer control of the Vance Legacy Trust to him. He thought of every condescending remark, every dismissive glance, every time Clara had made him feel small and worthless. He thought of her throwing that money on the table in the hospital. He signed his name. The stroke of the pen was firm and clear. "Let's begin," Liam said. The strategy session that followed was a masterclass in quiet, systematic destruction. Abernathy and his team of forensic accountants and corporate lawyers laid out the architecture of Marcus Thorne's financial life. It was, as the lawyer had promised, a fragile ecosystem propped up by ego and borrowed money. Thorne's primary lender for the Elysian project is Sterling Financial, one of the accountants explained, pointing to a complex flowchart. They've extended him a $300 million line of credit. He's already drawn down 2/3 of it. "And the Vance Trust," Abernathy added with a thin smile, "happens to own a 12% non-voting but influential stake in Sterling Financial's parent company, a legacy investment from Arthur." Liam listened, absorbing the intricate details. It was a language he didn't speak, a world of leverage and derivatives, but the objective was brutally simple. "So we can pressure the bank?" Liam asked. "We can do more than that," Abernathy corrected. "We can present the board with a risk assessment report compiled by us, detailing the extreme vulnerability of the Elysian project, particularly its dependence on the acquisition of our land. We will strongly recommend they invoke the material adverse change clause in their loan agreement. They will be forced to recall the loan." The plan was elegant. It was vicious. It used the system's own rules against itself. "What happens then?" Liam asked. "Thorne will have 30 days to repay $200 million. He doesn't have it," the accountant said flatly. "He'll default. It will trigger cross-default clauses in his other loans. His credit lines will be frozen. The entire house of cards will collapse." And so it began. Abernathy made the first discreet call. Anonymous files were dispatched to the right people. An invisible, unstoppable tide began to move against Marcus Thorne. Liam left the towering office late that afternoon and drove not home but to the hospice. He sat by Eleanor's bed, the rhythmic beat of her heart monitor a steady counterpoint to the storm he had just unleashed. She was sleeping peacefully. He held her frail hand, the skin as thin as paper. "I kept my promise, Eleanor," he whispered. "And I'm opening the envelope. The rainy day is here." A week later, the first tremors hit. Marcus Thorne was in a celebratory dinner with city officials when his phone buzzed. It was an urgent email from his CFO. He excused himself, his smile never faltering. In the marble-tiled restroom, he read the message and the world tilted. Sterling Financial was recalling the loan. All of it, effective immediately. He laughed, a sharp, barking sound. It was impossible, a clerical error, a power play by some mid-level banker he could have fired. He made a call, his voice full of blustering authority. He was met with a wall of calm, corporate regret. "I'm sorry, Marcus. The decision came from the very top. Our hands are tied." He went back to the table, his face a mask of charm, but a cold knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. The next day, the cascade began. A major institutional investor, spooked by a rumor of financing trouble, announced it was pulling its $50 million stake in the project. The news hit the financial wires, and suddenly Marcus Thorne, the visionary, was Marcus Thorne, the liability. His phone, which usually rang with offers and invitations, now rang with demands. Contractors wanted their invoices paid, suppliers cancelled shipments. The City Planning Commission announced a sudden, comprehensive review of all of Thorne Development's permits, citing anonymous but credible concerns about regulatory compliance. Clara watched the transformation in her new partner with growing panic. The confident, swaggering man who had swept her off her feet was replaced by a frantic, snarling stranger who spent his days shouting into a phone and his nights staring at the ceiling. "It's a conspiracy," he raged one night, throwing a crystal glass against the wall where it shattered like his future. "Someone is targeting me. They're trying to ruin me." "But who?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. The life she had so carefully constructed, the life she had ruined her marriage for, was disintegrating before her eyes. "I don't know," he yelled, "but when I find them, I'll destroy them." The social invitations dried up. The friends who had flocked to their lavish parties suddenly didn't return calls. The world of wealth and status she had craved was turning its back on them with brutal speed. They were becoming pariahs. Desperate, her own credit card suddenly being declined, Clara did the one thing she swore she would never do. She called Liam. He was in his workshop, sanding a piece of maple, when the phone rang. He saw her name flash on the screen and let it ring 3 times before answering. "Liam?" Her voice was strained, attempting a casual tone that failed miserably. "Hi, how are you?" "I'm fine, Clara," he answered, his own voice calm and even. He kept sanding as he spoke, the rhythmic rasp of the paper on wood, a soothing sound. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong? No, of course not," she lied, her voice cracking. "It's just, things are a little complicated right now. With Marcus's business, you know how it is." "I can't say that I do," he replied honestly. There was a pause. He could hear her take a shaky breath. "Listen, Liam, this is so embarrassing to ask, but I was wondering, could you possibly lend me some money just for a little while until Marcus sorts this mess out?" The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. She had left him, humiliated him, thrown money at him like he was a beggar, and now she was asking him for a loan. He felt a cold, satisfying wave of power wash over him. He was the author of her desperation, and she had no idea. He let the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in her own humiliation. "Liam, are you there?" "I'm here," he said, injecting a note of sincere-sounding regret into his voice. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I wish I could help. But things are tight. With your mother's bills and all, I'm barely keeping my own head above water." He used her own words against her. It was a cruel, perfect echo of her disdain. He heard a small, choked sound on the other end of the line. It was the sound of her last hope dying. "Oh," she whispered. "Right. Of course. Her bills. I understand." "I hope everything works out for you, Clara. Truly," he said, the lie tasting like victory. He hung up the phone before she could reply. Now they were the hands that were. Now they were the hands that were quietly, methodically, tearing her new world apart. The final act was set in motion by Abernathy. With Marcus Thorne teetering on the brink of complete financial ruin, the lawyer sent a formal letter. It was an invitation to a meeting at the offices of Abernathy and Crowe. The agenda was simple, a final, non-negotiable offer to purchase the assets of the insolvent Thorne development, including the now toxic Elysian Towers project, from the primary lien holder, the bank that had recalled his loan. The letter also stated that the mysterious owner of the crucial holdout property would be present, willing to finally discuss the sale of the land as part of the total acquisition. For Marcus and Clara, it was a lifeline, a last desperate chance to salvage something from the wreckage. They believed they were going to meet a reclusive billionaire, someone they could charm or intimidate into a deal that might save them from utter destitution. They spent their last remaining funds on new clothes, determined to project an image of success they no longer possessed. Clara wore a severe black dress, her face a pale, strained mask of composure. Marcus wore his most expensive suit, but it hung on him now, his recent stress having stripped pounds from his frame. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a ghost, haunting the memory of his own success. They rode the silent elevator up to the 50th floor of Lexington Tower, the same journey Liam had made weeks before, but theirs was filled with a gnawing dread. The silver-haired receptionist led them down the same long, quiet hallway to the same heavy oak door. "They're ready for you," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. They pushed the door open and stepped into the grand boardroom. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the vast polished table. At the far end of the table sat Alistair Abernathy, looking as ancient and immovable as ever. And beside him, in the chairman's seat, was Liam. He wasn't wearing his work clothes or his one shabby suit. He was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored dark grey suit that spoke of quiet confidence. He didn't look transformed, he looked revealed, as if this was the man he was always meant to be. Clara stopped dead in the doorway. Her perfectly composed mask shattered. A strangled gasp escaped her lips, and her face went chalk white with disbelief. Marcus stared, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Sterling, what the hell are you doing here? Get him out of here, Abernathy. We're here to see the owner." Liam didn't move. He simply watched them, his expression calm and unreadable. He let the silence stretch, filling the cavernous room until it was taut with tension. He wanted them to feel the full, crushing weight of their miscalculation. "Please have a seat, Mr. Thorne. Miss Vance," Abernathy said, his voice cutting through the silence like glass. "You are in fact here to see the owner." The implication of his words slowly dawned on Marcus. His eyes darted from Abernathy to Liam and back again, his mind refusing to accept what was before him. "No, that's impossible. He's a nobody." It was then that Liam finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room with an authority that silenced all argument. "Hello, Clara. Marcus." He gestured to the chairs opposite him. "Please, sit." We have a lot to discuss." They moved as if in a trance, their bodies clumsy with shock, and sank into the leather chairs. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You spent 10 years, Clara, treating me like I was something you had stepped in. You mocked my work, you despised my simple life, and you threw me away the second you thought you had found something better." His gaze shifted to Marcus. "And you? You built an empire of glass and steel, all while looking down on the people who do the real work. You called the man who owned this land a sentimental fool for holding back your glorious progress." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You were both so busy looking up at the sky, you never once thought to look at what was right under your feet. What you didn't know," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "was that Clara's father, a man you barely remember as a quiet history teacher, was watching. He built a legacy not of money but of principle. He set a test of character, a test of loyalty." Clara was staring at him, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide with a horrified, dawning comprehension. "While you were busy chasing status and taking my money for granted, Clara, I was paying your mother's bills. I was sitting by her bedside. I was keeping the promise you couldn't be bothered with," Liam said, the moral judgment in his voice as sharp as a blade. "And in doing so, I fulfilled the final clause of the Vance Legacy Trust." He spread his hands wide, a gesture that encompassed the room, the view, the city itself. "This? All of this belongs to me now, the trust, the fortune, and yes, Marcus, the land your entire future depended on." The truth, in its full, devastating scope, finally landed. Clara broke. A terrible, ragged sob tore from her throat. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, no, it can't be." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, a pathetic, impotent gesture. "This is a trick, a sick joke." Abernathy calmly slid a thick folder across the table. "I assure you, it is no joke, Mr. Thorne. That folder contains a detailed summary of the Vance Trust's assets. It also contains irrefutable evidence of your financial malfeasance, including wire fraud and conspiracy. Evidence which I am legally obligated to turn over to the district attorney's office should my client so instruct." Marcus opened the folder. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash as he scanned the first few pages. The game was over. He was utterly, completely ruined. He slumped back in his chair, a broken man. Clara turned her tear-streaked face to Liam, her expression shifting from disbelief to desperate, fawning appeal. "Liam," she pleaded, her voice thick with sham regret. "Liam, please, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was a fool. We can fix this, you and me. We can have it all back." Liam looked at her, at the woman he had once loved, and felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. The love had died long ago, killed by 1,000 small cruelties. All that remained was the scar tissue. "There is no we, Clara," he said, his voice flat and final. "You made your choice. You chose a richer man. You just chose the wrong one." He stood up, the movement signaling the end of the meeting, the end of an era of his life. "I will, however, continue to pay for your mother's care," he said, walking toward the door. "My promise was to her, not to you. A trust will be established to cover all of her expenses for the rest of her life. You will not see a single penny of it." He paused at the door and looked back at the two shattered figures at the table. "You wanted a life of luxury built on the work of others. Now you'll learn what it's like to have nothing. Abernathy will show you out." He walked out of the boardroom and didn't look back, leaving them to the silence and the consequences. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Marcus Thorne was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud. His spectacular fall from grace was front-page news, a cautionary tale for the city's elite. He was eventually sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Clara was left with absolutely nothing. The designer clothes, the expensive cars, the glittering social life, it all vanished. Blacklisted by the society she had so desperately clawed her way into, and with no skills beyond spending other people's money, she was forced to take a job as a hostess at a mid-range restaurant, the kind of place she and Marcus used to mock. Her public humiliation was complete. Liam, true to his word, established the Eleanor Vance Foundation. It wasn't just a trust for his former mother-in-law, it became a multi-billion-dollar charitable organization dedicated to building and funding state-of-the-art elder care facilities across the country. It was a mission born from a simple promise made in a quiet hospice room. He did not move into a mansion or buy a fleet of exotic cars. He kept his small house, the one filled with furniture he had built himself. He even kept his pickup truck. He sold his carpentry workshop to his former boss for $1, on the condition that they would always have a place for him if he wanted to work with his hands. Would have to choose between their financial survival and the dignity of their aging parent. One afternoon, he was visiting the construction site of the first Eleanor Vance Memorial Hospital. He stood watching the steel beams rise against the blue sky, a far more honest and hopeful structure than the ghost of Elysian towers. The lead architect of the project, a brilliant and kind woman named Sarah, came and stood beside him. She had a warm smile and eyes that saw him not as a billionaire, but as the man he was. "It's going to be a beautiful building, Liam," she said softly. "It's just a building," he replied, a genuine smile touching his own lips for what felt like the first time in a long time. What happens inside is what matters. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the future being built. He had lost a wife but gained a world. He had endured the rain and discovered that it was just what was needed to make something new and something far better grow. True wealth, he had learned, was not measured in stock portfolios or the height of skyscrapers. It was measured in kept promises, in quiet dignity, and in the strength of a character forged in the fires of disrespect. Cruelty and greed were a foundation of sand, and his story was proof that sooner or later the tide of justice always comes in.